The James Webb Space Telescope, humanity's most advanced space exploration instrument, was suddenly deactivated by NASA after it focused its observations on Mercury. Within 72 hours, all related data disappeared without a trace. ESA scientists found their access revoked, research files encrypted, and the shutdown order originated from the Pentagon itself. One thing became clear. Webb had detected something on Mercury that forced NASA to enact a worldwide information lockdown. Leaked findings sent shockwaves through the scientific community, revealing infrared images of perfectly hexagonal structures beneath Mercury's surface, along with light-reflective materials that resembled polished metal alloys. While NASA officially dismissed the findings as signal interference, independent observatories from Iceland to Chile independently confirmed disturbing evidence, mysterious radio transmissions emanating from the precise region Webb had scanned. This raises alarming questions. Did humanity accidentally trigger something dormant on Mercury? Or more unsettling still, has something been observing us from Mercury all along? The truth behind NASA's drastic decision to sacrifice its $10 billion telescope may be more terrifying than anyone imagined. The James Webb Space Telescope was meant to look far beyond our world. Its mission was to peer into the early universe, to study ancient galaxies, and to uncover secrets buried in cosmic time. But in mid-2024, something changed. For reasons that were never made public, NASA quietly shifted Webb's gaze from distant stars to something much closer. It was Mercury, the smallest and hottest planet in the solar system. Officially, the maneuver was labeled a calibration test. NASA explained that the goal was to refine Webb's imaging systems by targeting a bright object near the Sun. Webb was never designed to observe inner planets like Mercury. Its heat-sensitive mirrors and instruments are tuned for cold, distant light. Pointing it toward a planet scorched by solar radiation seemed not just unusual, but risky. No announcement was made ahead of time. The change in orientation was not listed in any public mission plan. There were no briefings, no published scientific papers, and no collaborative input from Webb's international partners. Just hours after the Mercury scan, NASA issued a brief statement. It claimed that Webb had experienced calibration stress and would enter a temporary standby mode. This was not entirely unheard of. Complex telescopes do require occasional adjustments. But this time, the shutdown wasn't routine. It was total, immediate, and without warning. The public data portal was the first thing to go. Files containing timestamps and observation logs from the Mercury window were marked as unstable. Within hours, they were either renamed, deleted, or restricted. Researchers attempting to access them were met with access errors or blank metadata fields. Inside the European Space Agency, confusion turned to concern. ESA had invested heavily in Webb. Its scientists had access to key data channels and were scheduled to review infrared scans that included Mercury's surface. But during one such session, a meeting was interrupted mid-presentation. The speaker was cut off. Minutes later, their access credentials were revoked. No explanation followed. Only a quiet email saying that project resources have been reassigned. By then, the shutdown had extended beyond NASA. According to a leaked internal memo from the Operations Center in Maryland, the command to place Webb in standby mode did not come from the scientific team. It came from a separate chain of authority involving defense and intelligence agencies. That detail alone shifted the conversation. This was no longer about calibration or technical errors. It was something else entirely. So far, no one has given a clear answer. NASA's public statements remain vague. There have been no follow-up reports, no transparency hearings, no peer-reviewed papers. Only rumors, whispers of strange thermal patterns. Talk of artificial structures, hints of anomalies buried beneath the planet's crust. Most of it is speculation. But speculation, in the absence of answers, has power. And in the background, one fact remains unshakable. Webb turned toward Mercury. It recorded something that triggered a full shutdown. And since that moment, the most powerful eye in space has gone dark. Whatever was seen that day was not meant for the world to witness. And the silence that followed may be louder than any official denial. But if this was just a routine calibration test, why did it trigger an unprecedented security lockdown? And what exactly did Webb see that made NASA act so drastically? The first signs didn't make sense. The initial data logs from Webb's Mercury observation showed temperature fluctuations that seemed too organized to be natural. The readings came in waves, consistent, measured, and rhythmic. These were not chaotic heat bursts or solar interference. They followed a clear pattern. Using infrared imaging, Webb's sensors scanned beneath Mercury's crust. What they found were geometric heat signatures spread across several regions. Some were triangular, others hexagonal, and some formed long straight lines that stretched for kilometers. No natural process could explain such perfect symmetry. Volcanic eruptions leave jagged shapes. Tectonic shifts create broken fault lines. But this looked engineered. The placement of these patterns was just as strange. They were buried beneath the surface, invisible to any optical telescope, but Webb's infrared vision pierced through the layers. It revealed heat rising in exact intervals, forming sequences like signals or pulses. The heat didn't spread outward like a thermal bloom. It pulsed inward, directed as if responding to something. In certain areas, Webb detected unusual reflections, spikes that suggested highly reflective metals or crystalline materials. These materials were not supposed to exist on Mercury. The planet is constantly bombarded by radiation and extreme heat. No known substance should remain intact, let alone shine under such pressure. Yet there they were. Polished, bright, and consistent across multiple scan zones. Some of these compounds resembled engineered alloys. Others matched the profile of synthetic crystalline structures found only in controlled conditions on Earth. The analysis was incomplete, but the trends were undeniable. This wasn't the chaotic crust of a lifeless planet. One particular segment drew attention from multiple analysts. It was located near Mercury's equator, in a geologically quiet zone with no prior history of tectonic activity. There, the heat patterns arranged themselves into perfect rows, equal spacing, uniform depth. And most unusual of all, they appeared to shift slightly between scan intervals, as if reacting to the telescope's movement. Some began to ask if the telescope had awakened something. Had the infrared beam triggered a dormant mechanism, or was Webb simply observing a process that had always been there, unseen until now? The questions deepened when leaked visual composites surfaced online. These were not raw data, but processed overlays built from Webb's infrared returns. It looked less like geology and more like architecture. A whistleblower from a private research group claimed to have reprocessed archived telemetry from the same time frame. He reported seeing phase-aligned heat echoes bouncing off buried surfaces, indicating smooth, artificial planes. That kind of reflection doesn't happen in natural rock. It only appears when energy strikes flat, engineered surfaces. They began cross-referencing data from older missions like Mariner 10 and Messenger. Buried in the archives, they found matching disturbances, minor, dismissed at the time as sensor noise. But now, with Webb's high-resolution scans, those errors began to look like missed warnings. The final clue came from Webb's own internal diagnostics. In fact, they recorded near-perfect calibration throughout the observation. The signal was clean, precise, and repeatable. Which means the patterns weren't just anomalies, they were real. They came from Mercury. The discovery flipped everything upside down. For decades, Mercury was thought to be inert, simple, and geologically dead. But now it looked like the planet was holding a secret that the James Webb Space Telescope in just a few minutes had accidentally uncovered. These impossible structures beneath Mercury's surface raised an even more disturbing question. If they weren't created by nature, then who or what put them there? What happened after the Mercury scan was not a pause for analysis. It was a retreat into darkness. The telescope didn't just go quiet, it was silenced. The first signs were small. Independent astronomers noticed that Webb's trajectory data suddenly showed a blank entry during the hours it had been aimed at Mercury. Observation logs that were once public now returned empty. Archived downloads were pulled from academic portals without warning. Even timestamps for when the images were captured disappeared, replaced by vague placeholders. At first, people assumed it was a technical glitch, but then it started to look intentional. NASA issued a carefully worded statement claiming that the Mercury data was incomplete due to calibration issues. They said additional testing was needed before the results could be verified, but the timeline didn't match. Normally, raw data is archived for later review, even if it's corrupted. This time, there was no trace of anything. Within 72 hours of the shutdown, several high-ranking members of the Webb operations team were reassigned. Their names vanished from project rosters. Scheduled press briefings were canceled without explanation. No follow-up papers, no technical bulletins, no public-facing comments. It was as if the entire event had never occurred. At the same time, data access across partner institutions became restricted. The European Space Agency and the Canadian Space Agency, both co-owners of the telescope, were locked out of specific segments of the Webb database. According to insiders, one ESA administrator described receiving a direct order to halt all Mercury-related data processing. No reason was given. The message simply read, "Suspend analysis indefinitely." These were not the actions of an open research initiative. A few days later, something even more alarming surfaced. A screenshot began circulating in encrypted chat groups used by independent astrophysicists. It showed an unusual infrared overlay labeled JWST_Mercury_SEC_14A. The image had been processed through several filters, revealing what appeared to be a linear thermal pattern beneath Mercury's surface. The formation was sharp, parallel, and symmetrical. To the trained eye, it didn't resemble a crater or a fault line. It resembled a tunnel system. The file was quickly removed from every server where it appeared. In some cases, accounts that shared the image were suspended. The original uploader has never been identified. What's more unsettling is that even internal teams who had worked on Webb's data confirmed they had never seen that file in the official archives. If it was real, it had been kept hidden from everyone. Several researchers tried to replicate the image by reconstructing data from earlier missions like Mariner 10 and Messenger. They found old magnetic maps that had shown odd localized distortions near Mercury's equator, the same region where Webb had focused its scan. These anomalies were once dismissed as sensor noise. Now they have taken on new meaning. When private labs attempted to correlate these locations with the Webb scan window, they discovered one chilling detail. The distorted areas lined up perfectly with the gaps in Webb's published trajectory logs. In other words, the telescope had indeed scanned that region, but the record of what it saw had been erased. All of it pointed to a deliberate effort. Data was not lost, it was removed. Access was not disrupted. What should have been a routine planetary scan had instead triggered a chain reaction of secrecy, redirection, and silence, and this time not beneath rock, but behind locked doors. As the data blackout expanded, one troubling possibility emerged. Was this just about hiding a discovery, or was NASA trying to contain something far more dangerous? As official channels went silent, speculation filled the void. Without access to the data, scientists, theorists, and independent researchers turned to the only thing left: possibilities. Mercury might not be what we thought it was. For decades, the planet had been considered geologically simple. It lacked atmosphere, tectonic activity, and potential for life. Its orbit was unusual but possible, and its magnetic field was strong yet unexplained. Now, in light of what Webb may have seen, old questions were being asked with new urgency. One theory suggested that Mercury had once been the site of artificial construction, not ruins left on the surface, but systems buried deep underground. This would explain the symmetrical thermal patterns, the unexpected energy reflections, and the geometric alignments picked up during Webb's brief scan. The planet could have served as a technological vault, a shelter built to survive radiation and time. Its harsh environment might not have been a weakness, but a defense. Another theory went further. It proposed that Mercury was never a natural object to begin with. Instead, it could have been built or modified, intentionally shaped to serve a purpose within the solar system. Its close proximity to the Sun, its resonance orbit, and its reflective surface might all point to design. The planet, in this view, was not just a rock, it was a machine. These ideas were not just science fiction speculation. They were rooted in anomalies in Mercury's magnetic field, strange radar bounces from past missions, and now Webb's unexplainable readings. Each new discovery seemed to support the possibility that something beneath Mercury had been waiting, dormant, for thousands of years. Some theorists looked at Mercury's orbit and saw more than gravity. They saw synchronization. The planet spins 3 times for every 2 revolutions around the Sun, locking it into a rhythm that never changes. If Mercury held a sensor, a beacon, or a relay, Webb might have turned it on. The final and most controversial theory was the one no one wanted to speak aloud. Mercury wasn't just a relic, it was part of something larger, something hidden in plain sight. In this scenario, Mercury was not the endpoint of the mystery. It was a node, one piece of a network, watching or transmitting, or both. And by looking at it too closely, humanity may have been seen in return. None of these theories have been confirmed. None of them may ever be. But after Webb's shutdown, they are being studied more seriously than ever. Because whatever the truth may be, it is clear that something powerful lies beneath Mercury's surface. And that power is not geological, it is intentional. These radical theories might explain Mercury's anomalies, but they lead to an even more unsettling thought. If Mercury isn't a natural planet, what else in our solar system might not be what it seems? When NASA shut down the James Webb Space Telescope, the world noticed, but it was not just a technological pause. To those who understood what the telescope meant, it felt like something much more. It felt like a wall had been raised between discovery and control. The European Space Agency was caught off guard despite having scientists, labs, and research plans ready for Mercury's data. Then, without explanation, access was revoked. One team in Geneva was mid-session when their server keys expired. They were disconnected instantly. Their attempts to reconnect were met with a single message: authorization denied. Canada, another key contributor, faced the same silence. Despite co-developing Webb's NIRIS instrument, Canadian researchers were abruptly ordered to halt all Mercury analysis without explanation or timeline. Behind closed doors, frustration turned into suspicion. International scientists who had once worked freely across borders began to question who was making decisions. At public events, officials stayed diplomatic. They talked about heat interference, instrument protection, and data recalibration, but their faces said more than their words. There was tension in every statement, caution in every phrase. Even reporters noticed how press briefings were cut short or reshuffled last minute. Outside the official world, the response was louder and faster. Independent observatories, amateur radio operators, and open-source astronomers began tracing Webb's final path. They studied infrared logs, old telemetry reports, and obscure metadata scraps. Some groups even tried to reconstruct the thermal signature from Mercury using public Earth-based satellites. What they found wasn't conclusive, but it pointed towards something that didn't belong. A quiet war began, one of data versus denial. On one side, national agencies tightened control over space-based information. On the other, independent researchers shared screenshots, patterns, and simulation models across private networks. The more NASA stayed quiet, the more the public began to listen elsewhere. This was no longer just a scientific question. It had become a political fracture, a test of who owned knowledge and who got to decide when the world was ready to receive it. And while the silence from officials continued, the world kept watching. Not just because of what was found, but because of how quickly it was hidden. As international tensions grew, a critical question remained. Why would the US risk its scientific partnerships and reputation unless what they found was truly earth-shattering? Just days after Webb went silent, the signal came. It didn't arrive through official channels or government observatories. It was picked up by a private radio station outside Reykjavik, Iceland. The operator wasn't even scanning Mercury. He was tracking low-frequency pulses for weather interference when he noticed something strange, something that didn't belong. At first, it sounded like static. Then came a series of short bursts. They were faint, uneven, and spaced too precisely to be random. The signal repeated 3 times, then stopped. The pattern returned 2 hours later, identical in timing and structure. He recorded it, ran a basic frequency analysis, and posted the data to a quiet online forum for SETI enthusiasts. Within hours, others confirmed the same thing. The signal wasn't local. Triangulation showed it was coming from the inner solar system. More specifically, from the exact region of Mercury Webb had scanned just before its shutdown. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the question was clear. Had the telescope triggered something? Several private radio arrays in South America and Eastern Europe began listening in. They fine-tuned their receivers, filtered out cosmic background noise, and focused only on the Mercury corridor. Soon they began detecting similar pulses, always low-band, always brief, but unmistakably structured. Each burst had 3 characteristics: a leading spike, a rapid echo, and a decaying tail that faded too smoothly to be natural. No known geological process on Mercury could produce such clean electromagnetic patterns. And with no atmosphere, no weather, and no known artificial satellites nearby, the list of explanations narrowed quickly. One lab in Ukraine used spectral compression to model the wave structure. The results were unsettling. The pulse sequence resembled a handshake protocol, the kind of digital introduction used by machines when first establishing communication. Not a conversation, not a message, just a presence being acknowledged. Other experts urged caution, warning of cosmic rays, solar interference, or instrument artifacts, yet none could explain the timing. Some theorists believe the telescope's infrared beam had acted as a key, activating a dormant relay or awakening a passive sensor buried beneath the surface. If true, this would change the question completely. It wouldn't be, what did Webb see? It would be, what saw Webb? No official space agency acknowledged the signals. None responded to the triangulation data or the open-source findings. But behind the silence, the signal kept pulsing, irregular, persistent, almost like breathing. NASA didn't stay silent because they had no answers. They stayed silent because the answers were too big. What Webb saw on Mercury may not have broken a machine, but it may have broken the boundaries of what governments were willing to explain. Throughout history, discoveries have often been delayed, not because they were false, but because they were too disruptive. If Mercury really holds signs of advanced technology, it doesn't just challenge one theory. It rewrites science, history, and humanity's place in the universe. And when ideas shake that many foundations, silence becomes easier than explanation. Security agencies treat information as a tool, but also as a risk. If a signal from Mercury is real, and if it was triggered by our technology, then it may not be us who's watching anymore. It might be someone or something watching back. That idea, even if unconfirmed, creates fear. Fear leads to control. Geopolitics makes things even harder. If the structures beneath Mercury contain valuable materials or energy systems, then whoever controls that discovery may control the future. In a world where resources are power, finding alien technology becomes more than science. It becomes a strategy. This may explain why so many researchers were removed without warning. It wasn't about punishing curiosity. It was about protecting the story, deciding who tells it and when. Even partner countries were left in the dark, not because of mistrust, but because the stakes had changed. Some believe the fear runs deeper than politics or control. They think Webb didn't just observe a dead system, but activated a live one. If true, it means our actions in space can now create reactions, and those reactions may not be safe. Turning off the telescope might have been a move of defense, not secrecy. NASA has never confirmed any of this. They've stayed on message, repeating that the pause was technical, not scientific. But the timeline tells another story. The data vanished too fast. The silence came too suddenly. And the risk, whatever it is, still feels active. Because this is no longer just about Mercury. It's about how close we've come to something we don't fully understand, and what happens if we try to get closer again. The most chilling possibility isn't that NASA doesn't know what's on Mercury. It's that they know exactly what's there, and it's something humanity isn't ready to face. The James Webb Telescope's discoveries about Mercury have opened a mysterious new chapter in humanity's cosmic exploration. Despite NASA's attempts to conceal the truth, the anomalous signals and artificial structures beneath the planet's surface prove one undeniable fact: the universe always holds wonders beyond our current understanding. Yet this is no time for fear, but rather an opportunity to move forward. Every revealed mystery, however unsettling initially, ultimately helps humanity grow wiser. Rather than fearing the unknown, we should see this as a reminder that the vast universe still awaits our exploration. Perhaps in the near future, with advancing science and enhanced international cooperation, we will find satisfactory answers. And who knows, these might become the key to unlocking a new era for human civilization. The Mercury enigma teaches us that truth will eventually surface, and when it does, our species will emerge stronger and more united in our quest for cosmic knowledge. This isn't the end of the story, but an exciting new beginning.